Imagine hundreds of planes tearing across the skies, engines screaming, bullets and bombs flying everywhere. London is under attack, the streets are chaos, and above it all, a handful of British pilots, outnumbered, outgunned, but never outmatched, dive and twist through the clouds to defend their country. This is the Battle of Britain. Courage, skill, and sheer determination against impossible odds. In the next hour, we're taking you straight into the heart of the fight, where every second mattered and the fate of a nation hung in the balance. Strap in, it's going to be intense. In the summer of 1940, Europe stood in the long shadow of a gathering storm. Nation after nation had fallen before the relentless advance of Hitler's armies, their borders crushed beneath the weight of blitzkrieg, and their skies darkened by the thunder of German bombers. Poland had collapsed in weeks. Norway and Denmark followed. The Low Countries fell in rapid succession. France, long regarded as one of Europe's great military powers, was defeated with astonishing speed. What had begun as a regional conflict had erupted into a continental catastrophe, and by June, the map of Europe seemed to reflect only one direction: the rise of Nazi Germany. Across the Channel, Britain now stood alone. The British Expeditionary Force had barely escaped annihilation, rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk in an improvised evacuation that saved more than 300,000 soldiers, but left behind weapons, vehicles, and mountains of destroyed equipment. Britain's army had survived, but it was battered, under-equipped, and reeling. The island nation faced the terrifying possibility that it might be next. And in the eyes of Hitler, that possibility was not a question at all. It was an objective. Yet even in these darkest days, a fierce resolve took root in the British people. Under the leadership of Winston Churchill, who had declared that he would never negotiate with tyranny, the nation braced itself for a struggle unlike any it had ever faced. Churchill understood the stakes clearly. If Britain fell, the last barrier against Nazi domination in Western Europe would be shattered. If Britain endured, the world would learn that Hitler's advance was not unstoppable. Victory or defeat would not be determined by armies on land, but by who controlled the skies above the Channel. It was here, in the quiet airfields scattered across southern England, that a new kind of war was about to unfold. Britain's Royal Air Force, smaller and outnumbered, prepared for a fight that would decide the fate of the island. Young pilots, many barely out of school, trained relentlessly as the threat grew closer. Veterans returned to service. Pilots from across the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, answered the call. Others fled from defeated nations, determined to continue the fight. Poles, Czechs, Belgians, and Frenchmen, who refused to surrender their homelands. They all gathered under one banner, united by a single purpose: protect the skies of Britain at all costs. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe marshaled overwhelming strength. Hundreds of bombers and fighters lined the airfields of occupied France and the Low Countries. Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, believed that Britain could be crushed from the air. He promised Hitler that the RAF would crumble in mere weeks. To clear the path for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, his aircraft would destroy coastal defenses, annihilate the RAF's fighters, and break British morale through devastating attacks on military and industrial targets. What awaited them was a contest of endurance, innovation, and raw human courage. The world's first major air campaign was about to begin, a battle fought not only in the clouds but in the operations rooms, radar stations, coastal lookout posts, and the minds of commanders on both sides. It would demand everything from those who flew, those who maintained the aircraft, and those who waited anxiously on the ground. But before the great clash could begin, the world held its breath as Britain faced the question that defined an era. Could a small island nation, wounded and alone, stand against one of the most powerful air forces the world had ever seen? Or would the skies above Britain become the pathway to invasion, occupation, and the collapse of the last beacon of democracy in Western Europe? The answer would emerge not from the halls of government or the smoke-filled rooms of military planning, but from the roar of Merlin engines, the crackle of radio transmissions, and the desperate dogfights unfolding miles above the ground. It would emerge from the determination of pilots who knew that each flight might be their last, yet climbed into their cockpits again and again. It would emerge from the resilience of civilians who braced for the thunder of enemy bombers. And it would emerge from the unshakable belief that freedom was worth defending, even when the odds seemed hopeless. This is the story of the battle that shaped the destiny of a nation. The battle where courage met chaos in the clouds. The battle where a handful of determined pilots stood against overwhelming force. This is the Battle of Britain. The road to the Battle of Britain began long before the first Luftwaffe aircraft appeared over the Channel. To understand why the conflict became inevitable, one must trace the sweeping momentum of the early months of the war, when German forces surged across Europe with unprecedented speed. Blitzkrieg, the lightning war that combined aircraft, tanks, and rapid infantry assaults, shattered traditional defenses and overwhelmed nations before they could mount meaningful resistance. Poland fell first, followed by the swift conquests in Scandinavia and the crushing victories in Western Europe. The German war machine seemed unstoppable. By May 1940, German armored divisions sliced through the Ardennes, outflanking Allied forces and collapsing the French defensive line. The British Expeditionary Force found itself trapped. Only a desperate evacuation from Dunkirk preserved the core of Britain's army, though it lost the vast majority of its heavy equipment. France surrendered shortly afterward, leaving Britain isolated, vulnerable, and staring directly at German occupation across the Channel. Hitler anticipated that Britain would seek peace. Its army was weakened, its allies defeated, and its mainland exposed. But Churchill refused any notion of surrender. Britain would stand alone, relying on its navy, its industry, and above all, its air force. Hitler, frustrated by Britain's defiance, turned to the Luftwaffe. If the RAF could be destroyed, Operation Sea Lion could proceed. If Britain's defenses could be broken from the sky, the island would fall. Britain began preparing in earnest. Fighter Command reorganized its defenses, relying on a groundbreaking network of radar stations and the Observer Corps to track incoming raids. Aircraft production ramped up, replacing the Luzes of France and preparing for the storm ahead. Pilots trained frantically, many completing only a fraction of the flying hours normally required before being sent into combat. The fate of the nation would rest on the shoulders of these young men. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe prepared for its most ambitious campaign. Göring assembled hundreds of bombers and fighters along the coast. Intelligence officers expected the RAF to collapse quickly under sustained pressure. German commanders believed that Britain had only a few hundred operational fighters left, and that once these were destroyed, the skies would belong entirely to Germany. The stage was set. Europe was in flames, and Britain faced an enemy that believed victory was not only possible, but inevitable. The coming battle would test every limit of endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower. The road to war in the skies was complete, and the storm was ready to break. The forces preparing to clash in the summer of 1940 represented two entirely different visions of air warfare. On one side stood the Royal Air Force, lean, strained, and stretched across the southern counties of England. On the other stood the Luftwaffe, powerful, confident, and sharpened by months of unbroken victories. Yet numbers alone never revealed the full story. What mattered was how these forces were organized, how they operated, and how their technologies shaped the battles to come. Britain's defense rested on Fighter Command, led by Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, a man whose calm demeanor and methodical thinking often concealed the weight of the responsibility he carried. His system, later known simply as the Dowding System, was the backbone of Britain's survival. It was a network unlike anything the world had seen. Radar stations lined the coast, each capable of detecting incoming aircraft long before they reached British airspace. Operators listened for faint signals bouncing off distant wings. They tracked altitude, direction, and speed. This information flowed into sector stations, where plotters slid markers across large maps under the direction of controllers who calculated how many fighters to scramble and from where. Above them all, Dowding and his commanders monitored the wider picture from the headquarters at Bentley Priory. They understood that the RAF could never afford to waste pilots or aircraft. Every scramble, every interception, and every decision had to be precise. Mistakes could cost lives and weaken Fighter Command at a time when Britain had no replacement for defeat. Beneath the new technology were the men who would take to the skies. Fighter Command was divided into groups, each responsible for protecting a section of the country. 11 Group, under Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, bore the heaviest burden, covering London and the southeastern counties where German attacks were expected to fall hardest. 12 groups supported the North Midlands, while 10 groups defended the southwest. Each group worked in constant coordination, yet each carried its own challenges and responsibilities. Park, in particular, faced the relentless pressure of responding to every raid that came over the Channel. His decisions, often made within minutes, shaped the course of the battle day after day. In the airfields scattered across these regions, ground crews worked tirelessly to keep the fighters ready. They refueled aircraft, repaired damage, replaced engines, and rearmed machine guns in minutes. The sight of a crew swarming over a Spitfire or Hurricane was a demonstration of pure urgency, for they knew that at any moment the scramble bell could ring and their pilots would be back in the sky, facing the next wave of German attacks. The aircraft themselves were the pride of Britain's aviation industry. The supermarine Spitfire, elegant with its elliptical wings, was fast, maneuverable, and beloved by its pilots. Yet it was the Hawker Hurricane, less glamorous but sturdy and reliable, that would bear the brunt of the fighting. The Hurricane formed the backbone of fighter command, easy to repair, forgiving to fly, and deadly when used properly in combat. Together, the Spitfire and Hurricane complemented one another. The Spitfires often engaged the Messerschmitt fighters, while Hurricanes tore into the approaching bombers. It was a partnership born not from perfection but necessity, and it worked with remarkable effectiveness. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe organized its own forces with equal determination. It possessed an overwhelming number of aircraft, and many of its pilots were seasoned veterans of campaigns in Poland, Norway, and France. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 was fast, powerful, and a formidable opponent in the hands of an experienced pilot. The Bf 110, a twin-engine heavy fighter, had been expected to dominate the skies, but it would soon face challenges against Britain's more agile single-engine aircraft. The German bombers were numerous and varied. The Heinkel He 111, with its sleek glass nose, and the Dornier Do 17, known as the Flying Pencil, formed the core of the bomber fleet. The Junkers Ju 88, fast and versatile, became one of Germany's most effective aircraft, able to adapt to many roles. Yet the Luftwaffe also relied on the Junkers Ju 87 Stuka dive bomber, which had been terrifyingly effective in earlier campaigns. Its sirens, mounted on the landing gear, wailed as it entered a dive, striking fear into those below. But the Stuka's slow speed and low maneuverability made it vulnerable against fighters like the Spitfire and Hurricane. Its role in the coming battle would diminish rapidly. What the Luftwaffe lacked, however, was an integrated defensive system like Britain's. German pilots often entered combat without full knowledge of RAF movements. Radar along the French coast was limited, and communication between bomber groups and fighter escorts suffered from delays and uncertainty. Bombers frequently arrived at targets without proper fighter cover, or fighter escorts often lacked the fuel to linger over battle zones. This gap, invisible on paper, would become increasingly significant as the battle intensified. Yet for all these differences, both sides possessed one thing in abundance: determination. The Luftwaffe believed its strength could crush Britain's resistance. The RAF believed that its system, its pilots, and its innovation could hold back the tide. The forces and technologies were ready. The commanders had made their preparations. And high above the fields, towns, and coasts of Britain, the skies that had long been peaceful were about to become the arena of a decisive struggle. The opening phase of the Battle of Britain began not with a grand declaration, but with small, precise strikes along the southern coast. In July 1940, the Luftwaffe tested the RAF's defenses in what became known as the Kanalkampf, or Channel battles. These initial attacks were designed to probe British capabilities, to draw fighters into the air, and to destroy coastal shipping that might supply resistance or evacuation efforts. German bombers crossed the Channel in formations that were disciplined and heavily escorted, while British radar operators scanned the skies and sent their warnings down to the sector stations. The first skirmishes were tense, brief, and revealing. They demonstrated that while the RAF was smaller, it was neither unprepared nor inexperienced. Pilots on both sides quickly learned the stakes. Young Hurricanes and Spitfires took to the air almost daily, chasing the silver silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf 109s and bombers that seemed to appear from nowhere. The skies above southern England became a delicate dance of speed, altitude, and maneuvering. A single misjudgment could mean destruction in seconds. RAF pilots, many of whom had trained under strict limitations and short flying hours, discovered the grim realities of combat immediately. The Luftwaffe, confident from victories over France and the Low Countries, found the British pilots unexpectedly resilient. Dogfights erupted within minutes of takeoff, and both sides began counting losses while adjusting their tactics. The Luftwaffe's strategy in these early weeks was methodical. Bombers would attack ports, shipping convoys, and radar stations, with fighter escorts positioned to ward off interceptions. Their goal was to cripple the RAF before it could mount a significant defense. However, the precision of these attacks was often compromised by weather, inexperience, and miscommunication. British fighters, though outnumbered, relied on their radar network and the vigilance of the Observer Corps to direct them efficiently to intercept points. These small victories, intercepting a bomber or downing an enemy fighter, were critical in maintaining morale and demonstrating that the RAF could not only survive but fight back. The Luftwaffe quickly realized that destroying radar installations was more difficult than anticipated. The British chain-home radar stations were often dispersed, camouflaged, and protected by rapid response fighters. Even when attacked, damage was usually temporary, and the stations were repaired almost immediately. This resilience frustrated German commanders, who began to question the effectiveness of their initial tactics. Bombers were forced to fly at low altitudes to improve accuracy, which exposed them to the Hurricanes and Spitfires waiting above. Losses mounted, though not yet enough to force a strategic reconsideration. Meanwhile, RAF control rooms worked tirelessly. Plotters, using sliding markers on large maps, directed squadrons to meet incoming raids in coordinated formations. Pilots were scrambled in waves, often flying multiple sorties in a single day. Fatigue became an immediate concern, but the determination of the men kept them airborne. Each interception was not only a battle against enemy aircraft, but a race against time, as bombers neared populated areas and critical infrastructure. The stakes were clear. Failure to intercept could mean destruction on the ground, while success could turn the tide of morale. By the end of July and into early August, patterns began to emerge. The Luftwaffe underestimated the stamina and tactics of the RAF. Fighter command's ability to rotate squadrons, repair aircraft, and utilize intelligence from radar created an effective force multiplier. German pilots, expecting easier victories, were frustrated by the agile Hurricanes and Spitfires that seemed to appear wherever needed. Losses, while still sustainable for Germany, were beginning to affect morale. Every downed bomber meant fewer aircraft for the coming weeks and fewer experienced crews to lead the next raid. For civilians on the ground, the opening phase was terrifying but also revealing. Coastal towns witnessed the first large-scale engagements in their skies, and news of German aircraft being shot down filtered quickly, offering a glimmer of hope. Air raid sirens, emergency services, and shelters became part of daily life, while the public followed reports of RAF successes with relief and pride. The courage of the pilots was mirrored by the resilience of those waiting below, a combination that would define Britain's endurance in the months to come. The Luftwaffe, despite mounting frustration, remained confident that a decisive blow could still come. Intelligence suggested that repeated raids could exhaust fighter command and allow Germany to achieve air superiority, clearing the way for Operation Sea Lion. Yet even at this stage, the early battles revealed vulnerabilities in German planning. Over-reliance on precision bombing, inadequate adaptation to British defenses, and underestimation of RAF coordination meant that the initial weeks were as much a test of endurance as of firepower. By mid-August, both sides were adjusting. The RAF recognized the need to maintain pilots and aircraft for sustained engagement, while the Luftwaffe re-evaluated its tactics in response to higher-than-expected losses. The opening phase, though not decisive, had set the stage for the major assault to come. It had exposed strengths and weaknesses on both sides, clarified the importance of radar, and reinforced the critical role of the men who flew above the clouds. The Channel battles were a warning. The skies above Britain would become the defining battleground of the summer, and the fate of the nation depended on the courage and skill of those who dared to defend them. The Luftwaffe's full assault began on August 13, 1940. a day that would later be remembered as, quote, as Eagle Day or Adlerangriff. Months of planning, intelligence gathering, and training culminated in this single, decisive push. German commanders believed that the destruction of the RAF could be achieved quickly, and that once air superiority was secured, Britain's southern coast would be open to invasion. Hundreds of bombers, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters, crossed the channel in tightly coordinated formations. The skies above southeastern England darkened with their presence, and the tension on the ground and in the air became nearly unbearable. RAF Fighter Command, however, was ready. The radar stations along the coast detected the incoming formations, sending alerts to sector stations and prompting a rapid scramble of Hurricanes and Spitfires. Pilots climbed into their cockpits, hearts pounding, fully aware that this might be the most important mission of their lives. Ground crews watched anxiously, knowing that every aircraft that returned would be one fewer than expected if disaster struck. The air was alive with the sound of engines, and the first encounters were violent, precise, and chaotic. The Luftwaffe's initial strategy was to target airfields and radar stations. Göring believed that crippling fighter command would prevent British resistance and demoralize the population. He underestimated the speed and coordination with which the RAF could respond. Pilots from 11 Group, led by Keith Park, intercepted the German formations at multiple points, engaging in dogfights that twisted and turned over Kent, Sussex, and the Thames estuary. Spitfires climbed to meet Bf-109s head-on, while Hurricanes tore into the bombers below. Each engagement was a high-stakes contest of speed, skill, and endurance, and the balance of victory shifted moment by moment. The Luftwaffe had calculated that overwhelming numbers would secure success. Bomber formations pressed forward relentlessly, their crews focused on destroying runways, fuel depots, and hangars. Anti-aircraft fire added to the chaos, and British fighter escorts struck from unexpected angles, often splitting the formations. Many German crews quickly realized that their intelligence had underestimated the effectiveness of Britain's radar and communications network. Bombers found themselves under attack earlier than anticipated, and losses mounted. For each bomber shot down, the Luftwaffe risked losing experienced pilots who could not be replaced quickly. For the RAF, the day was grueling. Pilots flew multiple sorties, often climbing into the sky immediately after landing. Fatigue became an ever-present threat, yet determination carried them through. Each successful interception not only protected the airfields, but provided critical morale boosts to a nation under threat. Observers on the ground tracked the battle with a mixture of fear and hope, watching as the skies filled with smoke trails and diving aircraft. The courage of the few, as they would later be called, was on full display, and it became clear that the outcome of the day would have profound consequences for Britain's survival. As the hours wore on, Luftwaffe losses began to accumulate. Bombers that were heavily damaged turned back or crashed, their crews taken prisoner or killed. Fighter pilots, no longer able to maintain tight formation under the relentless RAF attacks, struggled to regroup. Göring's promise of a rapid victory began to feel hollow. Yet the German commanders pressed on, determined to complete their mission, unaware that their repeated raids were strengthening the British resolve rather than breaking it. Each interception taught the RAF valuable lessons in tactics, timing, and coordination that would pay dividends in the weeks ahead. The engagement was not without cost to Britain. Dozens of pilots were lost, and aircraft destroyed on the ground. Yet every victory, every bomber downed, demonstrated that the RAF was far from defeated. The resilience of British defenses, combined with the ingenuity of commanders and the skill of pilots, began to shift the strategic picture. Radar coverage allowed controllers to direct squadrons with unmatched efficiency, often placing fighters at the right altitude and position to intercept before bombers reached critical targets. The human element, the judgment, bravery, and split-second decisions of pilots and controllers alike, proved as decisive as technology. By the end of Eagle Day, it was clear that the Luftwaffe had underestimated its opponent. The intensity of the RAF's defense, combined with the limitations of German tactics, meant that the battle would continue far longer than the Germans had anticipated. The initial assault, though dramatic and powerful, failed to achieve air superiority. Instead, it revealed the weaknesses of the German approach and the extraordinary resilience of Britain's defenses. Pilots and crews on both sides were exhausted, yet the fight would continue, day after day, as the skies above England became the defining battleground of the summer. The first full-scale engagement of the Battle of Britain demonstrated that the coming conflict would not be decided by sheer numbers alone. Skill, coordination, courage, and endurance were proving to be equally, if not more, important. As the smoke cleared over the airfields and towns, it became evident that Britain's airmen were capable of standing against overwhelming odds. Eagle Day had begun the battle in earnest, but it also revealed the truth that would guide the RAF through the months ahead. Victory was possible, but only through unwavering courage, relentless effort, and the determination to defend the skies at all costs. The days following Eagle Day brought a new phase of intensity as the Luftwaffe shifted its focus to attacking RAF airfields directly. The German High Command believed that by destroying runways, hangars, and aircraft on the ground, fighter command could be neutralized and air superiority claimed. Bomber formations, escorted by Bf-109 fighters, struck airfields in Kent, Sussex, and other key locations with relentless precision. Fires and smoke quickly became familiar sights across southern England as fuel stores burned and hangars collapsed. For the men on the ground and in the air, the stakes could not have been higher. RAF squadrons scrambled repeatedly, sometimes flying 2 or 3 sorties in a single day. Pilots were exhausted, yet determination drove them back into the skies. Each wave of German bombers was met with a calculated response, guided by radar and controllers who had become adept at predicting the enemy's approach. Spitfires engaged the faster Bf-109s while Hurricanes concentrated on the lumbering bombers. The coordination between aircraft, pilots, and ground command became the defining advantage of fighter command. Despite constant pressure, the British system held. The Luftwaffe's attacks were devastating, yet not decisive. Many airfields were damaged, and some Hurricanes and Spitfires were destroyed on the ground. Yet the British airmen adapted quickly, repairing runways, replacing lost aircraft, and returning to combat within hours. The resilience of the ground crews became as crucial as that of the pilots, as their efforts ensured that operational strength remained remarkably intact. Each repaired aircraft was a symbol of defiance, a statement that the RAF would not be crushed through a single wave of destruction. For the Luftwaffe, the attacks revealed significant vulnerabilities. German bombers were slow and required protection from fighters, which in turn limited their effectiveness. They had anticipated quick victories, but British interception strategies, combined with radar intelligence, meant that every bombing run was met with fierce resistance. Losses of experienced crews began to accumulate, a problem that would grow as the battle continued. The Luftwaffe's assumption that airfields could be destroyed faster than the British could repair them proved to be a critical miscalculation. Meanwhile, British command faced its own difficult decisions. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park and his subordinates needed to manage pilot fatigue carefully, ensuring that sufficient numbers were available for the next wave of attacks. Pilots often returned from exhausting sorties, only to be sent back into the air within hours. The human cost was high, and the RAF had no margin for error. Yet the combination of disciplined command, strategic foresight, and sheer courage allowed the British to maintain a level of operational readiness that continually frustrated German plans. Civilian life was also affected in ways that were both immediate and profound. Towns near airfields faced danger from bombs that fell indiscriminately, sometimes hitting homes, schools, and infrastructure. Residents learned to live with the constant threat of air raids, taking refuge in shelters, and adapting to the rhythm of alarm sirens and warning systems. Yet these attacks, intended to demoralize, often had the opposite effect. Seeing their airfields rebuilt, their pilots returning safely from missions, and the enemy failing to break through strengthened the resolve of the British people. Morale became as much a battlefield as the skies themselves. The Luftwaffe's pressure forced experimentation with new tactics. They tried low-level attacks to avoid radar detection and adjusted formations to reduce vulnerability to British fighters. However, these adaptations often exposed their bombers to increased risk from anti-aircraft fire or miscalculated escort coverage. German pilots who had previously been successful over France and the Low Countries found themselves facing an enemy that could respond with precision and adaptability. Every sortie, every dogfight became a test of skill, nerve, and endurance. By early September, a pattern was emerging. While the Luftwaffe could cause destruction and occasional chaos, The RAF's system of detection, response, and repair was proving resilient. The more the Germans pressed, the more the British adapted. The daily cycle of attack, defense, repair, and preparation had become almost routine, yet the intensity never diminished. Pilots became legends through their courage, ground crews through their efficiency, and command through strategic brilliance. Together, they created a network that could absorb losses and remain operational under conditions that would have crushed any other force. The shift in Luftwaffe strategy also had unintended consequences. As attacks on airfields continued, resources were diverted from other objectives, and German intelligence increasingly underestimated the RAF's ability to respond. The pressure on fighter command created a sense of urgency that drove innovation, from improved fighter tactics to coordinated squadron rotations. For the Luftwaffe, the belief that air superiority was near proved increasingly false, as each day of resistance demonstrated the RAF's capacity for endurance and adaptation. By the middle of September, the battle had reached a critical point. The Luftwaffe had failed to destroy fighter command, while British defenses had remained largely intact despite heavy bombardment. The attacks on airfields, though intense and destructive, revealed both the strength and determination of the RAF. Losses had been suffered on both sides, but the resilience of Britain's air force and the courage of its pilots and ground crews had shifted the momentum. The stage was now set for the next phase of the battle, where the Luftwaffe would make a strategic miscalculation that would have profound consequences for the future of the campaign and the survival of Britain itself. By early September 1940, the Luftwaffe faced a critical decision. After weeks of relentless attacks on airfields and radar stations, German commanders believed they could crush the RAF and secure air superiority. Yet, despite their sustained bombardments, fighter command remained operational. Pilots were exhausted, ground crews were overworked, and aircraft had been lost, but the system endured. Amid this pressure, a single miscalculation would shift the course of the battle dramatically. The turning point began when German bombers, largely by accident, struck London on September 7th. Their intended targets were military installations, but a navigational error led to the first massive bombing of the British capital. Fires erupted across the city, sirens wailed, and civilians scrambled for safety in underground stations and hastily prepared shelters. The Blitz, as it would come to be called, had begun. For the Luftwaffe, this represented a change in strategy from targeting the RAF directly to attempting to break British morale through civilian bombings. For the British people, it marked the beginning of a harrowing period of endurance, courage, and solidarity. The shift in German focus brought unexpected relief to fighter command. Airfields and radar stations, no longer the primary targets, experienced fewer attacks, allowing pilots to recover and ground crews to repair vital infrastructure. Aircraft that had been damaged or destroyed on the runways were quickly replaced or repaired, and operational capacity remained high. Keith Park and other RAF commanders seized the opportunity to strengthen defensive strategies, rotate squadrons, and ensure that the most experienced pilots were available for critical missions. The Luftwaffe, in attempting to demoralize the population, had inadvertently given the RAF breathing space. For the pilots, the new phase of the campaign presented a different challenge. Interceptions over London were chaotic and unpredictable, as bombers targeted civilian areas rather than airfields. Spitfires and Hurricanes had to adapt their tactics to protect urban populations, often engaging formations in the midst of smoke, fires, and anti-aircraft defenses. The skies above the city became a complex battlefield, with dogfights erupting over streets, parks, and landmarks. The courage required of these pilots was extraordinary, as each sortie carried the knowledge that mistakes could result in civilian casualties or personal death. The Blitz also highlighted the resilience of the British people. Civilians endured nightly raids, firebombs, and widespread destruction, yet refused to yield to fear. Underground stations became makeshift shelters, and communities organized to assist those affected by bombing. Women and men worked tirelessly as air raid wardens, firefighters, and medical responders. The collective determination of civilians, combined with the efforts of the RAF, created a society that could withstand both physical destruction and psychological strain. The morale of the population, far from collapsing, strengthened in response to adversity. German tactics during the Blitz, however, were not entirely without effect. Some raids caused significant destruction to housing, infrastructure, and industrial facilities. The psychological impact was considerable, as Londoners faced the reality of a modern city under sustained aerial bombardment. Yet the Luftwaffe had underestimated the British capacity for adaptation. Civilians developed routines and precautions that mitigated casualties, while the government ensured continuity of essential services. The strategy of bombing to break morale failed, as it only seemed to solidify the determination of a nation under siege. For fighter command, the period of the Blitz allowed for tactical innovation. Squadrons experimented with new formations, coordinated multi-group interceptions, and refined approaches for engaging bombers over urban terrain. Pilots became increasingly skilled at balancing aggression with caution, learning to protect civilians while maximizing the effectiveness of their attacks. Ground crews, having adapted to sustained operations, ensured that aircraft remained operational despite damage from previous sorties. The combination of human ingenuity, training, and coordination proved decisive. By mid-September, the consequences of the Luftwaffe's strategic shift became clear. The RAF's strength remained largely intact, while German losses continued to mount. Experienced bomber crews were irreplaceable, and the cumulative effects of repeated attacks began to degrade the Luftwaffe's operational capacity. The misjudgment of Britain's resilience had shifted the momentum of the battle. Instead of achieving air superiority, Germany found itself stretched thin, expending resources on civilian targets that did not yield the expected psychological collapse. The RAF, emboldened by its ability to withstand repeated attacks, prepared for what would become the most significant day of the Battle of Britain. The resilience of pilots, the coordination of command, and the endurance of civilians had created a defensive system that the Luftwaffe could not easily overcome. The unintended consequence of the Blitz was that it allowed Britain to recover, reorganize, and prepare for the climactic engagements that would determine the future of the campaign. The shift in Luftwaffe strategy ultimately highlighted the critical interplay of morale, technology, and human courage. While German bombers struck cities, British pilots continued to defend the skies, civilians continued to endure the attacks, and fighter command maintained its operational strength. The Blitz, intended as a tool of destruction, became a turning point that allowed Britain to consolidate its defenses and prepare for the decisive battles to come. By the end of September, it was evident that the RAF's ability to adapt and persevere had fundamentally altered the trajectory of the conflict, setting the stage for the climactic engagements that would define the Battle of Britain. September 15, 1940, would later be remembered as the pivotal day of the Battle of Britain. Across southern England, the skies were alive with tension, anticipation, and a quiet determination that would define the outcome of the campaign. For weeks, the Luftwaffe had been attacking relentlessly, probing defenses, and attempting to wear down fighter command. By mid-September, German commanders believed that the RAF was weakened, that repeated losses had depleted pilots and aircraft, and that air superiority could finally be achieved. They were wrong. From the earliest hours of the morning, radar stations along the coast detected massive formations of German bombers approaching the southeastern counties. Reports were sent immediately to sector control, and squadrons were scrambled with extraordinary speed. Hurricanes and Spitfires climbed into the sky, engines roaring as pilots braced themselves for what would become one of the most intense days of aerial combat in history. Each pilot knew the stakes. The survival of Britain depended on their skill, their courage, and their willingness to confront overwhelming odds. The Luftwaffe advanced in large, coordinated waves. Heavily armed bombers flew in tight formations, with fighter escorts patrolling the flanks to intercept British defenders. The German strategy was to overwhelm the RAF through numbers, destroy remaining airfields, and finally achieve the air superiority that would pave the way for invasion. Yet, from the outset, the German formations encountered fierce resistance. RAF squadrons, guided by the radar network and coordinated through sector controllers, met the attacks with precision and determination. The first wave of engagements was chaotic and violent. Spitfires climbed to meet Bf 109 fighters head-on, twisting and diving through the clouds in a deadly ballet of speed and maneuver. Hurricanes focused on the bombers, seeking to disrupt formations and prevent them from reaching targets. Anti-aircraft fire from the ground added another layer of danger, forcing German crews to contend not only with agile fighters but with relentless flak. Every attack, every interception, tested the skill and endurance of both sides. Pilots faced exhaustion, extreme heat in their cockpits, and the constant threat of death or capture. Despite their numerical advantage, the Luftwaffe struggled to maintain formation under the pressure of RAF attacks. Bombers were forced to fly lower to avoid fighter interception, which increased vulnerability to anti-aircraft fire and ground defenses. Escorts were spread thin, leaving bombers exposed at critical moments. Experienced crews were lost, and replacements were not immediately available. Each engagement inflicted cumulative damage that Germany could not easily replace, while British pilots, though fatigued, continued to arrive at the battle through careful rotation and disciplined command. The battle over London and the southeastern counties escalated into a continuous series of dogfights. The roar of Merlin engines filled the sky as Spitfires executed climbing turns, diving attacks, and tight maneuvers designed to outmatch the Bf-109s. Hurricanes, though slower, used stability and firepower to devastating effect against Heinkel and Dornier bombers. Every pilot was aware that failure meant not just personal death, but the possibility of allowing bombers to reach vital targets on the ground. The courage required in these moments was extraordinary, and the skill of the pilots often turned the tide of individual engagements. By mid-morning, it became clear that the Luftwaffe was suffering severe losses. German intelligence had underestimated the RAF's endurance, coordination, and tactical flexibility. Pilots returning from sorties reported heavy casualties among bomber crews, disorganized formations, and increasing difficulty maintaining control under constant attack. Fighter command had held firm, protecting airfields, radar stations, and critical infrastructure, while inflicting damage that Germany could not easily replace. The balance of power, once assumed to favor the Luftwaffe, was now shifting. As the day wore on, fresh squadrons were sent into the fray, replacing those already in combat. Pilots who had flown multiple sorties continued to engage the enemy, driven by determination and an understanding of the stakes. Ground crews prepared replacement aircraft and coordinated refueling and rearming to ensure that the next wave could respond immediately. Radar operators and controllers worked tirelessly to track enemy movements, predict attack routes, and direct pilots with extraordinary efficiency. The integration of technology, human skill, and coordination became decisive. By the afternoon, German commanders realized that their assumptions were flawed. Losses were mounting, bomber formations were breaking apart under pressure, and the RAF remained capable of sustained defense. The dream of air superiority, the prerequisite for Operation Sea Lion, was slipping away. Despite repeated attacks, the Luftwaffe could not achieve its objective, while British pilots continued to intercept with precision and resilience. Every destroyed bomber and downed fighter represented not just a tactical success, but a strategic turning point. By evening, the skies over Britain had cleared, leaving behind smoke trails, shattered aircraft, and the exhausted but victorious defenders of the RAF. September 15th had become a symbol of resistance, a day when Britain had faced its most severe test and emerged intact. The courage, endurance, and coordination demonstrated by the pilots and ground crews had ensured that the Luftwaffe could no longer claim dominance in the skies. For the first time, it was clear that Germany would not achieve air superiority, and the planned invasion of Britain had been postponed indefinitely. The significance of the day extended beyond immediate military victory. It demonstrated that determination, skill, and coordination could overcome numerical advantage. It solidified public morale, inspired pilots and civilians alike, and shifted the strategic momentum of the war. September 15, 1940 would forever be remembered as a decisive turning point, the day when the skies of Britain became the proving ground for courage, endurance, and the unyielding spirit of a nation determined to survive. The aftermath of the Battle of Britain marked a profound turning point in the course of the Second World War. By late September 1940, it was clear that the Luftwaffe had failed to achieve its objective of air superiority. Despite weeks of relentless bombing, heavy losses, and repeated assaults, Fighter Command remained operational, its pilots and ground crews still capable of defending Britain's skies. The failure of Germany to secure dominance meant that Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed indefinitely, sparing the island from immediate occupation and preserving a critical base for future Allied operations. German losses during the battle were substantial. Experienced pilots and crews, honed by campaigns in Poland, France, and the Low Countries, had been decimated. Bomber formations that had once appeared unstoppable were broken, and aircraft replacements could not keep pace with the attrition. Fighter units, though initially confident in their superiority, had been challenged and exposed to tactics and coordination they had not anticipated. The Luftwaffe's misjudgment of British resilience and underestimation of fighter command's effectiveness had proven to be a strategic miscalculation of the highest order. For Britain, the victory came at a significant cost, yet it reinforced the nation's determination and resolve. Dozens of pilots were killed, and aircraft destroyed or damaged beyond repair. Civilian casualties were heavy, particularly during the Blitz, which followed the focus shift to London and other urban centers. Cities were scarred by fires and bombed-out buildings, yet the people endured. Communities organized relief efforts, rebuilt what was destroyed, and continued to function under constant threat. This endurance, combined with the success of the RAF, created a powerful sense of national unity and demonstrated the ability of a society to withstand sustained adversity. The strategic consequences of the battle were far-reaching. Britain's survival ensured that the island remained a base of operations for the Allies, allowing future campaigns in North Africa, Italy, and ultimately the liberation of Western Europe. The morale boost for the British public and for Allied nations abroad was enormous. The idea that Hitler's forces were invincible was shattered. The notion that a small, determined, and well-organized air force could hold off a numerically superior enemy inspired confidence not only in Britain, but in countries across the world resisting fascist aggression. The personal cost and heroism of the pilots cannot be overstated. The men of Fighter Command, later immortalized by Churchill as the Few, flew multiple sorties each day, often under conditions of extreme fatigue, poor weather, and constant danger. Their courage, skill, and endurance became a symbol of the battle itself. They faced enemy aircraft that were sometimes faster, heavier, and more numerous, yet relied on precise coordination, training, and personal bravery to prevail. Each interception, each dogfight, each successful defense of a bomber or airfield contributed not only to tactical victories, but to the broader strategic outcome. Beyond the pilots, ground crews, radar operators, and command staff played a critical role in the victory. Aircraft were repaired and returned to service, fuel and ammunition were distributed with meticulous efficiency, and intelligence was gathered, interpreted, and acted upon in real time. The integration of technology, logistics, and human effort proved decisive, creating a network that allowed Britain to absorb attacks, respond effectively, and maintain operational strength throughout the summer. The Battle of Britain was not won by a single element alone. It was the result of coordination, ingenuity, and perseverance across every level of defense. Internationally, the battle had important consequences for Germany as well. The failure to destroy Fighter Command delayed Hitler's plans and forced a reconsideration of strategy. Luftwaffe losses weakened the force for future campaigns, and morale among German airmen was affected by the unexpectedly effective resistance. The psychological impact of a failed air campaign, coupled with the knowledge that Britain remained unconquered, introduced a new level of caution and recalibration within the German High Command. The illusion of easy victory had been dispelled. The battle also set precedents for modern aerial warfare. Radar, integrated command and control systems, rapid aircraft production, and adaptive tactics became hallmarks of effective defense. The conflict demonstrated the importance of coordination between technology and human decision-making, showing that superior numbers alone do not guarantee success. Lessons learned during the Battle of Britain would inform military strategy for years to come and highlight the critical role of innovation, preparation, and adaptability in modern warfare. Ultimately, the Battle of Britain became more than a military engagement. It became a symbol of resilience, courage, and national determination. It showed that even in the face of overwhelming odds, skill, strategy, and perseverance could prevail. The RAF's victory ensured the survival of Britain as a free nation, preserved a critical base for Allied operations, and inspired hope across the world. It was a turning point not only in the war, but in the broader fight for democracy and freedom, The legacy of those who fought, those who endured, and those who coordinated the defense lives on, a testament to the courage and determination that defined one of the most critical moments in modern history. The Battle of Britain, fought over the skies of southern England in the summer and early autumn of 1940, marked one of the most remarkable episodes of courage and endurance in military history. Its significance went far beyond the immediate destruction of aircraft and loss of life. It represented the survival of a nation, the preservation of a democracy under threat, and the demonstration that determination, skill, and coordination could overcome even overwhelming odds. The skies, once peaceful and unremarkable, became a theater in which the fate of Britain, and by extension the world, was decided. In the aftermath of the battle, the collective effort of countless individuals became evident. Pilots, many barely out of their teens, had faced nearly impossible odds and continued to fly sortie after sortie, often with little sleep and under constant threat of death. Hurricanes and Spitfires soared into the clouds, engaging bombers and fighters in precise maneuvers that required both courage and technical skill. Their actions not only defended airfields, radar stations, and cities, but also served as a visible symbol of resistance, demonstrating to the world that Britain would not surrender, even in the face of formidable enemy power. Ground crews, radar operators, and command staff played roles just as vital as those in the air. Aircraft damaged or destroyed on the runways were repaired with incredible speed, ensuring that squadrons could return to the skies without delay. Fuel, ammunition, and intelligence were distributed with precision, allowing pilots to focus on the fight above rather than the logistics below. Every radar operator, every controller in the sector stations, every mechanic on the airfield contributed to a network of defense that proved more formidable than any single bomber formation. The victory of Fighter Command was as much about planning, coordination, and resilience as it was about individual heroism. Civilians also played a crucial part. As the Blitz descended upon London and other cities, ordinary citizens displayed extraordinary courage. Underground stations became shelters. Neighborhoods organized fire watching and relief efforts. The ability to maintain daily life amid constant threat reflected a determination and unity that were as critical to Britain's survival as the air battles themselves. The population's refusal to yield to fear meant that German strategy, which relied heavily on breaking morale through terror, ultimately failed. The people of Britain had become active participants in the defense of their nation, demonstrating that resilience extended beyond the cockpit. The strategic implications of the Battle of Britain were profound. Hitler's failure to destroy Fighter Command meant that Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, was postponed indefinitely. This preserved the island as a base for the Allies, allowing for subsequent campaigns in North Africa, the Mediterranean, and ultimately the liberation of Western Europe. The victory shattered the myth of Nazi invincibility, giving hope to occupied countries across Europe and inspiring resistance movements. It proved that a determined, well-prepared force could withstand a numerically superior enemy, provided it combined strategy, technology, and human courage effectively. The battle also changed the nature of warfare. Radar, communications, intelligence, and rapid response coordination became recognized as decisive factors in modern combat. The integration of these systems into a coherent defensive strategy illustrated the importance of innovation, preparation, and adaptability. Lessons learned over the skies of Britain informed not only the remainder of the Second World War, but the evolution of military strategy for generations to come. Fighter Command's success demonstrated that superior numbers alone could not guarantee victory, and that leadership, morale, and ingenuity were equally critical. The legacy of the pilots, the ground crews, and the civilians endures. Winston Churchill's words, describing the airmen as the few, captured the extraordinary courage required to withstand the Luftwaffe's attacks. Each pilot who climbed into a cockpit, each mechanic who repaired a damaged aircraft, and each citizen who endured the Blitz became part of a collective story of perseverance and defiance. Their actions, individually and together, ensured that Britain remained free, that democracy survived, and that the Allies retained a critical foothold for the ongoing struggle against tyranny. The psychological impact of the battle cannot be overstated. For the British people, it became a symbol of national determination and pride. For the Germans, it represented the first significant check on their apparent invincibility. Internationally, the success of Fighter Command inspired hope and solidarity among nations resisting fascism. The courage displayed over the skies of southern England became emblematic of the larger struggle against oppression and the fight to preserve freedom, highlighting the human qualities that underpin historical events: bravery, resilience, and the refusal to surrender in the face of overwhelming danger. Ultimately, the Battle of Britain was not merely a military engagement, but a defining moment in history. It demonstrated the capacity of a small but determined nation to resist a powerful aggressor, the critical importance of innovation and coordination in warfare, and the enduring impact of individual courage and collective effort. The skies above Britain, once filled with fear and uncertainty, became a testament to human endurance and strategic brilliance. The victory ensured not only Britain's survival, but also the possibility of a broader Allied resurgence that would eventually turn the tide of the war. The story of the Battle of Britain remains a timeless lesson in courage, sacrifice, and the power of collective determination. It serves as a reminder that even in the darkest hours, skill, preparation, and unwavering resolve can preserve freedom and shape the course of history. The pilots who faced the enemy in the skies, the ground crews who maintained the lifeblood of fighter command, and the civilians who endured the Blitz all contributed to a legacy that continues to inspire. Their determination and courage ensured that Britain stood firm, unbroken, and ready to fight on. In the end, the Battle of Britain was more than a contest of planes and pilots. It was a testament to the unyielding human spirit, the defense of liberty, and the triumph of resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity.